Emma and I are now joined by Jack Bushman. Jack is the host of Locked On Blackhawks. Jack is somebody who understands what it means to work a lot through the offseason because Chicago has not been doing nothing this offseason, Jack. You all have been very, very busy.
Yes, it has been a lot. Ann and Emma, thank you very much for having me on the show. I can definitely relate to a little bit of a chaotic offseason, some notable signings. It's made for good content, as we were talking about before the air. So, yeah, should make for an exciting Central Division for both of our teams. I think a pretty exciting outlook as we're about to get into here, I'm sure, in just a second.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to kick it off with probably the question that you get a lot when you do crossovers, and that is we want to talk first about Connor Bedard.
Of course, of
Darling
course.
Connor Bedard, drafted here in Nashville. Emma and I were there, got to see it, which was really amazing. Had a really good first season, of course, dealt with a little bit of an injury, but just overall, do you feel like he met expectations in his rookie season? And how do you see him going forward? What did you see from him, and how does that project for you?
Yeah, as far as the expectation goes, maybe not hitting that point per game plateau or having as many goals necessarily as some folks were expecting in his rookie year. Maybe he didn't meet the expectations that way, but from just his play on the ice and also how he handled all the pressure and being in the spotlight. I mean, from day one of the season, even before that, I mean, basically from even prior to when he got drafted, right? It was nonstop for him. I'm sure a rookie season that was very taxing, both mentally and physically for him, as well as just, having to go through a 82 game season for the first time in his career as well. He handled it really well. And I think just the improvements that we saw from him throughout the course of his rookie season too was really what we wanted to see him just kind of start to get comfortable and establish some chemistry and then really start to take over games once he got that confidence. And we definitely saw that in the second half. I think the most notable thing about his game that stood out to me was the development in his playmaking and just his overall hockey IQ. It feels like he learns on the fly really quick, and it didn't take him long to get much of an adjustment to the NHL level, but his playmaking really hit a stride in the second half of the season, whereas in the first half, he was really relying on his goal scoring to be on the stat sheet most nights. And by the second half, I mean, he was the driving force of the power play, the main distributor. So from all accounts, yeah, maybe the numbers weren't as high necessarily as some expected, but he also didn't have a lot of help alongside him. Taylor Hall was brought in to really be that top line left winger, another guy who was also drafted first overall. And I think he only wound up playing 11 games on the season because of a torn ACL. And then the Blackhawks dealt with a slew of injuries as well. The offense was the worst in the entire NHL. So Connor Bedard really had to do it himself. So I don't really have any complaints. And he certainly held his own out there and I thought was very impressive. And most importantly, got better as the year went on. As far as where he goes from here and kind of what I'm looking for this season as far as hopes is just taking that next step, right? And he has some more talent alongside him now. So I think the expectations, rightfully so, are going to be for him to take that next jump. He's still going to be, that top line center. That's basically the role that he was in from day one. So the coaching staff gave him a lot of ice time, and that actually only went up as the season progressed too. So it felt like he was getting the trust of that coaching staff. And I really feel like there's not going to be any holding back with his game this upcoming season. So just really excited to see what that next step is going to be for him now that he's going to have a little bit more competent offensive players alongside him.
Yeah, he really did such a great job for an 18-year-old handling the pressure of, in a lot of ways, being the new face of the league. So kudos to him and to the people that he has surrounded himself with, because man, did he handle a major role in the league just with a lot of maturity. It was
Yeah.
good to see. It was really good to see.
And what's also just so impressive about him is that he has such a good head on his shoulders. I mean, he's such a good kid, says all the right things, never puts himself first, even though they're always asking questions about his personal accolades and how he, compares to certain superstars like a McDavid, since he's held in that generational category, right? And he never really makes it about himself. He said all the right things and just handled everything so properly. He's just such a good kid, an easy player to lead by example. It feels like even at 18, 19 years old, just because he's kind of got that wow factor around him. People are ready to kind of go at his command. So yeah, he's just a really impressive kid on and off the ice, and has really handled that superstar role as well as you can as an 18, 19-year-old.
Talking about the off-season moves that you guys have made, one of those, I guess, old/new faces that you brought in is Teuvo Teravainen, and kind of just wanted to get your perspective on, obviously he was, a key piece of a Carolina team for a number of years after he was with the Blackhawks. But I think, obviously he's grown up a lot and he's seen his role kind of change a lot. How do you see his role on this team, and what do you where do you see him playing? I've seen kind of different projections of him being on the top line with Bedard, or maybe the second line, or where do you kind of see him slotting in?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. It is definitely exciting to have Teuvo Teravainen back, but yeah, on paper, not exactly sure how everything is going to sort out. But quite honestly, I think that was kind of what Kyle Davidson wanted to do with this offseason from a front office perspective. He not only wanted to bring in some more talented players, but he wanted to establish some depth here and really make sure guys earn their jobs. And there's going to be battles all over this roster. I mean, fourth line, third pairing, defenseman. Like, there's going to be battles going on in camp. And you just kind of referenced one of them. Like, there's no one really set in stone up there along with Connor Bedard. Philip Kurashev got that spot last year, but I don't know if I ever necessarily really see him being a top line player. Taylor Hall, it figures to be a good spot for him, but he's going to be coming off a torn ACL. And then Tyler Bertuzzi and, like you mentioned, Teuvo Teravainen in the mix. Regardless of where Teuvo ends up, whether it's on the first line or the second line, I firmly believe he's going to be an integral part of the Blackhawks top six, the power play unit, and also his versatility. Going back to when he first stepped onto the NHL scene with the Blackhawks, he was already trusted upon by Joel Quenneville at that time to be a penalty killer, and his versatility really paid dividends for the Carolina Hurricanes for the many of years that he played for that team. So he's going to have his fingerprints all over the Blackhawks lineup, and he's going to be used in a multitude of different ways. But yeah, going to be interesting to see if it's going to be him and Tyler Bertuzzi, if it's going to be Taylor Hall. It feels like you'd want to give someone like a Bertuzzi the opportunity with Bedard, maybe as a little bit of a protector. And, he provides that grit and sandpaper out there while also not really sacrificing offensive abilities. But yeah, it's going to be fun one way or another. And I know a lot of Blackhawks fans are excited to have Teuvo Teravainen back.
So one of the things that recently went down here in Nashville, you probably heard of it, Yaroslav Askarov traded to San Jose. One of the teams that was rumored to be in on conversations about Yaroslav Askarov was the Chicago Blackhawks. And so I just kind of wanted to check in with you. Is that something that you think the Blackhawks were in conversation with? And what does goaltending look like going forward for the Blackhawks?
Yeah, I think anytime there's a player of the caliber of Yaroslav Askarov on the trade block, I think you'd be, being foolish if you're not doing your due diligence. The Blackhawks actually have some pretty decent goaltending depth. They have Drew Commesso, who was a second-round pick in that 2020 or actually he might have been 2019. These years all mesh together. They fly by. But regardless, he's been a highly touted Blackhawks goaltender prospect for these last couple of years. He stepped onto the AHL scene last year. And then in 2023, the Blackhawks also took the first goaltender off the board in Adam Guyan. But regardless of that, with the high ceiling that Yaroslav Askarov provides, I think the Blackhawks had to be certainly involved in those conversations. And funny enough, I remember when the Predators selected him 11th overall, the Blackhawks were involved in trade calls to try to move up. So they've probably had their eyes on him for a long time. I talked about this on my show. It was a topic of conversation, a good little headliner, and something that I think people would be interested in from a Blackhawks perspective. But I never really felt like the Predators, I felt like there were going to be a lot of suitors for Askarov, and if they could trade him out of the division so that he wouldn't torch them for years to come, that would probably be the best idea possible. So I think they were going to avoid that route. So I mentioned to my listeners, I always thought it was going to be far-fetched to land him, but I definitely expected Kyle Davidson to at least ask and give it a try because, yeah, one of the best, if not the best goaltender prospect in the entire world. So yeah, you got to have some interest in a player like that, right?
Yep, absolutely. Well, we don't anymore. That's how it goes down here. And that, of course, is not the only thing that's gone down in Nashville in this offseason. Coming up, Jack is going to turn the tables and check in on all of the busyness that's been going on this offseason in Nashville as well. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. If you are looking to make some of those late summer memories or attend a great fall event, you have got to check out Game Time. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to get tickets to your favorite sports, theater, comedy, and music events. Game Time also has a new feature now called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And hey, if you are traveling for the holiday weekend, check out Game Time's great deals in your destination city. Right now, they are offering 50% off for tickets to the Diamondbacks Dodgers game. Game Time makes it easy to see what you are purchasing up front with views from your seat. And when you activate their all-in pricing, you will not be surprised by excess fees at checkout. Your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Jack, it's again been busy in Chicago. It's been busy in Nashville. What can we catch you and your listeners up on?
Yeah, first and foremost, speaking of busy off seasons, not only busy, but maybe the most impressive offseason, at least from my perspective, of any NHL team. And at least from afar, what feels like the most noteworthy offseason in the history of the Nashville Predators. I just kind of want to know, what's the vibe around this team right now? There's got to be some sort of excitement level getting these notable additions in. A Jonathan Marchessault, who's won a Stanley Cup with Vegas and was a huge part of their success from day one of an organization. Steven Stamkos, obviously, been there, done that for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then Brady Skjei on the back end. UC Saros gets the huge extension. I'll ask Askarov questions here in just a second, but just from that front, from what the Predators did on July 1st, talk to me about the excitement around this team as we're about to head into September here.
Yeah, the vibes are good here in Nashville. That's for sure. I think there's been a lot of excitement around this team, and you hit on it, but that's kind of been the general message here in Nashville, is that this is a watershed moment in the franchise history, which frankly, regardless of what comes of this, of these signings and everything, if it results in a Stanley Cup, I mean, that's certainly the goal. But I think regardless, I think what was most important about it is that Barry Trotz going shopping on July 1st really just kind of sent this message to the fan base saying, hey, we're trying to win right now. We're done being in this mushy middle where every year we, make the playoffs and lose in the first round. And, it gets old and it gets frustrating for the fans and for the players too. And so I think, he kind of did what fans had wanted him to do, but I think that he like David Poile was not comfortable with a full tank, and build it back up from the studs. I think there was this idea of this competitive rebuild, and understanding what he has. And you mentioned UC Saros, but also you have Philip Forsberg, you have Roman Josi. Those guys aren't getting any younger, and so kind of taking advantage of what they have now and really trying to make a run for it.
Yeah, quite honestly, what I described it, or how I described it, I should say, to my listeners was like, I'm proud of the Nashville Predators. Like they went for it finally, and it was a little frustrating even as an outsider to watch the Predators be in that middling ground. And I understood it a little bit because I always try to think about the Nashville market and keeping the fans interested there by having a competitive team year in and year out. I do think there is upside to that. But at the same point in time, you're shooting yourself in the foot by not choosing to tear it down or absolutely go for it. And to see that they actually did, and really feels like moved all their chips in this basket. And like you referenced, Emma, recognizing that Philip Forsberg, he's not getting any younger. Let's take advantage of what this guy can still do and give him an opportunity that he really hasn't had, even though he's been a premier player for this organization for quite a long time. It feels like this is the best run that the Predators really have given it in their history for me. So yeah, that's how I've described it to my listeners, is like, good for you, Nashville. You finally went for it, and we're going to see how it pays out.
Yeah, the good thing about this is that Barry Trotz really went bold, but he didn't leverage the future of the team. And that, I think, is what has everybody in Nashville so excited, because if Barry Trotz went all in on Stamkos and Marchessault and saying our window is the next 2 to 4 years, we have to win a Stanley Cup, and he got there by trading away top prospects and by trading away the draft capital that he has stockpiled, I think the vibe would feel a little different. I think it would be much more high pressure, much more you have to deliver in this window. But Barry Trotz was able to do this. And a lot of this is compliments to the situation that David Poile left him with as he retired as general manager. But Barry Trotz has been able to continue to stockpile some draft capital. They also have some really interesting prospects that are playing in Milwaukee that are really fighting for an opportunity to maybe crack this roster in the next 2 to 3 years and be a part of a deep, contention run. So I think there is a lot of positivity because it hasn't been either or. Like, Barry Trotz has been able to be Mr. Right and Mr. Right now with what he's done.
And while obviously the notable offseason additions and Philip Forsberg, UC Saros, those are going to get the players that are going to get the lion's share of attention, I'm curious, who are a couple maybe not so notable players that you really think could help get this Nashville Predators team to this next level that you think could be maybe like a breakout player candidate that you're keeping an eye on for this year?
I think Emma and I would both kick it off with Luke Evangelista. Am I right? Yep.
Yep.
Luke Evangelista. So he played his first full season last season, and it was under a new head coach, and there were a lot of changes and a new system. But by the second half of the season, you really saw Luke Evangelista get it and get what Andrew Brunette wanted from him and get what he needed to do to be more successful at this level. And I think if he can continue that, if he can sort of pick up where he left off at the end of last season, this could be a breakout year for Luke Evangelista.
Yeah, I think part of that too, like what's going to really play a big role in that is how Andrew Brunette and the coaching staff decide to deploy all of these new assets that Barry Trotz has gotten them. Because something that we've been saying, watching Luke Evangelista over the last year and a half, saying like, man, if he could just get with a really solid playmaking center, like he is right there, and he could just, he is right there. He could just almost get it. And I think that is going to be, a big part of what we see at training camp and early in the season is, how are these new pieces going to fit into the lineup? Is Steven Stamkos going to shift back to center? Is the top line going to stay together of Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist? Or are they going to try to break those guys up? And, because you want to put players like Evangelista in the position to really kind of unlock their full potential. And so I think that was kind of what we saw at least last year was, he was right there and you could see it. You could see him gaining confidence. But the problem is you bury him on the third line with Mark Jankowski and Colton Sissons. That's maybe not the best position for him to be successful. But I think he's maybe not the fastest, like his skating isn't the best, but he's got that playmaking ability and he's just really dynamic. And like I said, you could really see him kind of growing up before your eyes over the last year. And I'm excited. I know we're both excited to see what he can do this year.
Awesome. Last question I have is just about the entirety of the goaltender decisions that were made by the Nashville Predators front. Obviously giving UC Saros the 8-year deal, I believe it was, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Obviously rewarding him for his outstanding play over the years and being a big factor in why the Nashville Predators even got to the playoffs these last few years. And I don't know if there's been a better goaltender against the Blackhawks the last 5 to 6 years. I mean, every time UC Saros is in net against the Hawks, it's basically 2 goals or fewer for us. But obviously you give him the extension, but then you also give Scott Wedgwood a 2-year deal. And then that leads to not a clear path no longer being there for Yaroslav Askarov. We now know he is a member of the San Jose Sharks. Just give me your thoughts as a whole over the decisions made by Barry Trotz and the Predators organization over, I guess, all 3 decisions. The Saros extension, basically choosing him as the franchise goaltender over Askarov, and then bringing in Wedgwood, which kind of forces Yaroslav out of the picture.
Yeah, I think, it's obviously been the topic of conversation in Nashville really for the last couple years as Saros was entering the last year of his contract, which is this year. And, it's something that we've said on our show a lot is just because you have this trade chip or this tradable asset doesn't mean that you have to trade him. And I think that was, for so long, I mentioned the Predators being stuck in this mushy middle and, okay, where are we going? Are we just going to stagnate here or what? And I think that, the idea was, all right, maybe we just call it a wash, sell, get rid of Saros, bring up Askarov, see what you've got, and then just kind of go from there. And I think for so long, this franchise hadn't picked a direction, and that's what doing this, this shopping spree on July 1st, I think that all of that hinges on UC Saros and his contract, because something that we've said on our show several times before is that you don't get Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault and Brady Skjei if UC Saros is not your starting goaltender. You don't get those guys if Askarov is your goaltender, because not that he's not talented or skilled enough to be an elite NHL goaltender, because I think he is. He's just not there yet. And so we talk about having a timeline and, being successful for the long term, but also being successful right now. And I don't think, as talented and skilled and exciting as Askarov is to watch, he's not the guy that's going to drag you into a playoff race if you need him to. Now, hopefully the Predators don't need goaltending to drag them into the playoffs as they have for so many years. That's why they went out and got all these new pieces. But, you'd like to have that if you can.
Yeah.
And I would say the Scott Wedgwood signing, and Emma and I have said this, the Scott Wedgwood signing, I understand was sort of the nail in the coffin for Yaroslav Askarov. But when Barry Trotz sort of committed to this window of we want to be a contender in the next 2 to 4 seasons, when you have Scott Wedgwood as your backup, you are counting on him to keep your team winning games and getting you to the playoffs and into the playoffs if something, knock on wood, were to happen to UC Saros. If Yaroslav Askarov is your backup, what you want from him is to gain NHL experience. And that may be at the expense at times of winning games. And so Scott Wedgwood really was an indication that Barry Trotz is in, chips are in. We want all bases covered so that we can really try to be a contender in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. The time is now, and while you believe in the hype behind this kid, it still is a little bit of a question mark, and you can't really bank on question marks when UC Saros is the real deal. So I'm sure it was a tough trade for them to make, but one ultimately they probably had to do if they want to win right now, and gets them a little bit of assets back before, you wind up getting nothing down the road one day, or he sits in Milwaukee, which fortunately for all my Rockford Ice Hogs followers, they won't have to see Askarov down in Milwaukee anymore. Him and Wallstead in the Central Division have just been, killers for the minor leagues. It's been poor Ice Hogs just struggling to get the puck past those two guys.
That's right. Yeah, it's gonna be a different look in Milwaukee in net for sure with Yaroslav Askarov moving on. Coming up, we're gonna talk about projections. What do we see happening with these two teams next season, and is the rivalry back? So, Jack, want to check in with you about next season. I know it's so hard to make projections. It sounds like both of our teams have a lot of decisions that need to be made, and those decisions may not be made until training camp when you kind of see these pieces they brought in together. But when you look ahead overall, do you see this team making improvements? Do you see the Blackhawks moving up in the Central Division?
Man, I really, I don't think there's any way it gets worse. And I say that knocking on wood. I've done that time and time again throughout the course of the summer, but just based on the additions that they brought in, if they're healthy, there's no way they don't take that next step. I mean, bringing in veterans like TJ Brody, Alec Martinez to really shore things up on the defensive side of things, and also just be good veteran leaders to all the young defensemen the Blackhawks have in their pipelines right now that are starting to step onto the pro scene. They shored up their goaltending by bringing in Laurent Brossoit. And then we talked about Tyler Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen being two notable additions to the offensive side of things. They also brought in Craig Smith, who you are all familiar with as well. Pat Maroon, too, acquired Ilya Mikheyev. So, yeah, this team absolutely should be ready to take that next step. They're also much older than they've been for the last few years. I do still think they're going to lack that, other than Connor Bedard, that superstar offensive power. I think they're not going to be the worst team in the NHL offensively like they were last year, but I don't know if they're going to be one of the better groups. But I do expect them to be very tough to play against. I mean, it's a veteran bunch. Nick Foligno, Tyler Bertuzzi, Alec Martinez on the back end with Seth Jones, Connor Murphy. There's a lot of big bodies for the Blackhawks, and it feels like we have a good 1A, 1B situation in net for the first time in a couple of years. So, yeah, I'm excited to see this team, again, knock on wood, hopefully take that next step. We've been wanting to see this for the last couple of years, but the rosters just have not been talented enough. You can't say that about this roster that the Blackhawks are walking into training camp with. So, yeah, it's the first time in a while. I'm excited to see how things are going to be shaking out in training camp, and excited to see how these guys are going to be looking out there on the ice. I think they're going to be a bit of a surprise team. I don't know if they're ready to get to that playoff level, but I think they're going to be a scrappy bunch.
What do they need to do to get to that playoff level? What are the pieces you want to see them add?
Yeah, which is the weird part about it, because I don't know if they're in a situation to add right now, because they're just preaching such a patient approach. And they really
Mhm.
want to develop all these prospects the right way. And one thing that was the downfall of the Blackhawks being in contention and winning those 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years was the prospect pool really got neglected, and Rockford kind of became a little bit of an afterthought. And even in 2019 and 2020, we saw Kirby Doc and Adam Boquist get rushed to the NHL, and neither really had a swimming tenure with the Chicago Blackhawks. So it feels like Kyle Davidson is still being very patient. So I don't know necessarily if they're going to be in ad mode at the trade deadline. Quite honestly, if anything, I think they'd be a little bit of sellers. Like, they have Alec Martinez on a 1-year deal, and considering his age, I don't really think he's someone they have in their long-term picture. So I don't know if they're going to be doing too much adding, and that's kind of where it gets tough to see the ceiling of this Blackhawks team and them really breaking through and getting back into Stanley Cup contention. And I'm sure Kyle Davidson in the front office would love if the Blackhawks found a way to get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I don't know if that's necessarily the expectations he's seeing with this team. I think all in all, from all accounts, the fan base, the organization, the front office, they just want to see this team get better. It's been a dark couple of years watching this team be at the bottom of the standings, and it's the Chicago Blackhawks. Fans are always going to show up and love this team. But last year was the first time it really felt like they were like testing the fan base's patience a little bit. And it seemed like the front office understood that. So, yeah, just ready to see this team be better. I don't know if they're going to be ready to take that type of hurdle, but like I mentioned, I think they're going to be a scrappy team to play against, and I don't think they're going to be putting together the 8-game losing streaks that we've seen plague this franchise for the last few years.
It kind of feels like all of the Central Division, or most of the Central Division, have been very busy this offseason. I mean, got Chicago, obviously Nashville, then you have St. Louis making moves. You've got Winnipeg seems to maybe have taken a step backwards. I don't know. I guess we'll see, but I don't know. What's kind of your thought on the division as a whole, and how that race will kind of shake out?
It feels like it's a very unpredictable year for the Central Division compared to years past, and Winnipeg can never put a finger on them. I think they're going to be horrible. They wind up finishing second and sneaking into the playoff. Like, I don't ever expect them to make a playoff run, but you never know what that organization is going to be. But outside of Colorado, yeah, I really think it's up for grabs because I think Dallas is taking a little bit of a step back. Nashville obviously is expected to kind of climb up. Minnesota's still in a little bit of a weird spot financially because of the Parise and Suter deals from all those years ago. So yeah, it's kind of hard to exactly put a finger on what's going to go down with this Central Division. But I do believe the top three, at least from afar, that I'd put in August. I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a long shot here, but it feels like Colorado, Nashville, and Dallas are really the three top teams in my eye that I'd be looking for the Central Division this year. But yeah, I mean, as far as 4 through the rest, it kind of feels like it could shake out in any order, right? Like, I don't know what to expect out of the Central this year.
Yeah, it's kind of
gonna be
exciting. It's exciting because I think we're so used to it just being Colorado and Dallas and then
Right.
everyone else. And now
Yeah.
it does, like you said, I mean, those two are still definitely at the top, but it feels a little bit more like anyone's race right now.
Yeah, shake it up. I'm excited for new teams, hopefully, to get in the mix here. St. Louis, I don't know what they're doing. They just love spending money. Like, I swear, giving out a ton of money. I don't know. They never
Giving
work.
out offer sheets to everyone.
And
Just-
I went to college in Missouri, and unfortunately, I had to watch the St. Louis Blues win a Stanley Cup while I was there. It was maybe the worst time I've ever had. But I've had the conversation with so many Blues fans, like they gave out so much term and so much money to those guys. They really hindered their chances, and it feels like they're still kind of dishing out. I mean, the contract that they just gave Philip Broberg is like $2.5 million too much. I'm like, will you guys ever learn? I don't know. I don't know what the Blues are doing. But
I think it's okay for Chicago and Nashville if it takes them a while to learn their lesson.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I think we'll sleep fine at night. You had mentioned just that this Chicago team is going to play a little scrappier with a little bit more of an edge. And we know that Chicago and Nashville in the past, ooh, saucy rivalry, y'all. Saucy rivalry. Do you expect some of that back between these two teams, with Chicago kind of taking that step forward, adding some of those players that are going to be in the mix, going to be physical, going to be sandpaper? And how do you see these two teams shaking out when they meet?
Yeah, I would love it. It feels like the Blackhawks haven't had a rival with anyone in so long because they've been so bad. But yeah, Nashville, when I was growing up and really fell in love with the Blackhawks, some great playoff battles between those two teams. Same with the Hawks and the Minnesota Wild. I would love to see this rivalry kind of get rekindled here. And funny enough, I have a couple of good buddies in Nashville, and I was just looking at the schedule a couple of days ago. Blackhawks don't play the Predators until 2025, I believe. Oddly enough, is their first meeting, if I saw things correctly. But the Hawks are in Nashville on March 8th, Saturday, March 8th. My birthday is March 11th. So I texted my buddies, like, I'm always in for an excuse to come to Nashville. I don't know if the Nashville fans will be treating me too welcoming as I'm wearing my 98 Connor Bedard sweater. But yeah, I'd absolutely love for that rivalry to get sparked back up. As far as what I could see from these two teams when they meet this year, as I referenced earlier, UC Saros just gives the Blackhawks fits whenever they meet. But I would like to see the Blackhawks handle their own, be a little physical with this Nashville Predators team, and yeah, kickstart that rivalry once again. I'm not gonna say I envision the Blackhawks getting the better of this Predators team in the season series. I think it's pretty clear who has the better squad on paper. But yeah, would love to see some hard fought interdivision rivalry matchups between these two teams once again, and hopefully we get that this year.
That'd be great. Jack, let everyone know where they can find you and find the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on X or any socials at Jack Bushman 2. Locked On Blackhawks you can find for free wherever you may listen to your podcast. And if you want to check it out on X, follow the show at _Blackhawks.
All right. And you can find us, of course, at LO_Predators on social media. You can find the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform and, of course, on YouTube as well. Jack, thank you so much for joining us. We have heard you may come to Nashville in March. Emma and I will be watching for you to show up.
And Emma, thank you so much for having me. I've already texted my buddies and he told me I could stay all weekend. So it sounds like we're already having the plans going down here. Just got to make it happen.
Sounds great. We'll see you then.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.